Journey of man from savagery to civilization has been so fascinating and breathtaking. It has taken him epochs and aeons and ages to discover the world around him. How did it all begin? What is the story of civilization? What are the subjects like evolution, creation, and civilization all about? And in fact, is civilization the privilege to be enjoyed by few and then envied by the rest? This is the subject for our today's discussion, and we have invited eminent author and intellectual Professor Shafi Shoque from University of Kashmir, Department of Kashmiri in our studio to deliberate on the topic and to explain the concept of civilization and the story that we have to weave around it. So Professor Shafi Shoque, we welcome you in our studio.
Thank you.
We begin with the question, the all-important question, that is the definition, the bedrock. So how can we define the word civilization?
My definition, it is not necessary that my definition coincides with the other definitions of civilization. So many definitions of civilizations are there. But to me, it is the sum total of the material progress man has made in his struggle for existence in a certain ecological framework. Whatever he has achieved for his survival, for his pleasant existence on the surface of earth, of course, that has been conditioned by the ecological factors, by the sources of energy that were available to him in different climes and different lands and different times. The sum total of that struggle is civilization. But at the same time, it is all that also what it has done because of his irrational drives also. Irrational drives in the sense that there is some kind of a share of madness in every person of mankind. That share of madness, that irrational element that man has exhibited in his playfulness with the natural phenomena, in achieving such things, such stupendous things which may seem absurd, but at the same time they have continued to add into various civilizations. For instance, erecting big structures or towers to reach to the gods, to reach to the skies, or at the same time poetry, painting to copy whatever the natural phenomena he
so is that man's quest, man's hunger to know new things, to unfold, to demystify certain mysteries, or is it a kind of urge, a kind of desire to compete God, as you've said?
Yes, man, it is said, all religions believe that man has been created in the image of God. He has been endowed with a competence that only God has, but a little share of that competence is with every one of us, that is creativity. God is creator, so man is also a meaning creator, he has been creating. But creation, creating things, one aspect of it is to create such things that make his life a pleasurable experience. But at the same time, certain things he creates that have no utility, that have no use to his practical living, but they add to the beauty of living. For instance, this different shapes of clothing, different styles of hair, different styles of mustaches, and many things. So all those things, because man has basically three basic needs. One is his preservation, to remain alive, within
safeguard his life.
Yes, so safeguard his life in threat against the threats of nature. He is struggling against the forces of nature to preserve himself. But at the same time, another is his love. So procreation also, because he wants to procreate his race, he wants to live beyond his individual existence in the future ages. So his instinct for love is another drive, and the third drive is his recognition. He wants to get himself recognized by others. So all the three needs, love, preservation and recognition have
been the
played
driving forces of
these have been the driving forces that have built up civilizations across the world in different
So we may need a little elaboration on that
Right.
part, but that will be later. The first we'll try to simplify and so that the concept, the story of civilization will
Right.
not sound as that ponderous, that cumbersome a process, that philosophical process that's not understandable to a
Right.
common man. The simple question is that how did different clusters of human beings come together to form one civilization, to form one bigger group
Right.
that we now, down the ages, down the centuries, down the millennia, we've been able to name it as civilization. How did it all happen, in fact?
The starting point of civilization was, it is said, anthropologists believe that when man entered the agricultural mode, he found certain lands, certain patches of lands advantageous to his existence for agriculture. When he found abundance of water, abundance of fertile soil, he settled at those locations. And when such primary settlements came into existence, they tried to form certain in-groups and out-groups. When they formed in-groups, living at a particular place, having the same land, appropriating all that they had at their around them, but at the same time they developed out-groups also, because there was a sort of rivalry, there was a sort of competition in acquiring those natural resources for their advantage. So in different climes, since the climates and ecological factors differ from place to place, certain civilizations, without having any fascist designs, without having any arbitration over others, came into existence, and those small inner groups became and outer groups ultimately became nations, became countries, because they had certain things common with each other, particularly their rootedness to their soil, their sense of appropriation, and their having their own, for instance, their own graveyard, or certain where they could bury, or they could cremate their dead. All these things put together, they contributed to their in-group mentality, in-group instinct. They strengthened it, and with the complexity, increasing complexities in life, with the increasing complexities in modes of production, those small in-groups, tribes became bigger nations. And
was that what you are talking about? You
Right.
have summed it up so elegantly, that how did it all happen? Then was that a natural process that such amorphous, disorganized and conglomerate groups and masses and clusters of people got together, and gradually we see nations and territories and countries and continents grow out of it? Or there is a volition that it's involved in it, that man deliberately and by intent consciously tried to secede himself from the rest of the community and to define his borders and territories?
Maybe there are different designs, different purposes of these boundaries, these artificial boundaries that man has erected on the surface of the earth. But the basic and the ultimate and the fundamental thing that contributed to the division of mankind into nations and countries and races was their economical struggle. Economy has played the basic role in the formation of these individual civilizations, cultures, and nations. And that process is still we can observe around us. It is the economic struggle in order to grab others' natural resources that they strengthen their nationhood. They make their frontiers rigid and excommunicate others and develop some kind of exclusionistic ideology around their nations. Then because they want to not only to preserve whatever they have, but also to grab, to exploit the natural resources of other groups around them.
Sir, language, expression, which is the indispensable part, the inexpendable part of the whole civilizational framework. How did language evolve?
Yes, language has been an integral part of civilization, definitely, because it is the only medium, the only vehicle through which we communicate, we comprehend things, cognition takes place, we think and make it understandable for others also. It is the language, because man is the only living thing, a living organism that is symbolic in nature. It has this tendency of symbolizing things, and it is work, his multifarious work, his activity in the day-to-day work that has necessitated that we symbolize more and more, it is not compulsory that we carry things along, but instead of things we carry the symbols around them. And from the very beginning of civilization, man has been creating myths around things. He has been creating meaning of things, meaning about things, because it is his own cognition of a particular thing, his own understanding of a particular thing, that he has associated different meanings to different words. And since races were mutually insulated from each other by natural boundaries, whether they were oceans or big unsurmountable mountains or big rivers, they were the natural barriers that that created different languages initially. But those bigger languages that came into existence were essentially speech, because it was his vocal delivery, his vocal sound, and that he could instead of using signs, body language, gesticulations, he used those vocal utterances in order to create words. So double articulation takes place. Other animals also are in a position to utter vocal sounds, but man has the competence to recombine those vocal sounds into words. It does not remain confined to the basic phonemes, basic sounds of a language, but we recombine those basic sounds and to create infinite. In a finite vocal sounds, we create infinite words, and we recombine them in infinite ways, and that he has that natural competence.
All human beings in just one language. Then territories and nations came into being. Then how did different languages come into form? What is this division of language all about?
If we speak from the linguistic point of view, this is not true. It is said, linguists believe, and it has been proved, that there were more languages initially, because languages later on got coalesced with each other. Initially there were innumerable languages, because the roaming nomads, each roaming nomad had their own speech. He had their own dialect. And so dialects were there. In fact, every individual has his own dialect. Every individual has his own way of using a particular language, what we call idiolect. Those idiolects, if put together, if there is some kind of consensus within a linguistic community, that forms a dialect. Initially there were innumerable dialects, because those tribes were mutually unintelligible to each other. But with the coalescence of different civilizations, with different cultures, bigger languages came into existence. When one dialect influenced the other dialect, one dialect borrowed from the other dialects, and so the concept of language came into existence. Right.
So food, and then clothing, and then shelter, and then an urge to procreate, and then protection of your life, the basic instincts, and then you've added one more, the recognition, that somebody wants to be recognized. What is the most powerful drive in a human being?
I will say all of the three. His preservation, his instinct for preservation, procreation, and recognition, all put together, because these three conditions characterize human being essentially. They cannot be isolated from each other. When
it's a set of
instincts. Yes. So they have played together, and then ultimately I would add one more instinct to the basic drive, that is the stimulus struggle. Stimulus. Man is always in the quest of for fresh stimuli to live, fresh stimuli. because he has this limitation that everything gets old in his hands. Whenever something new comes into his hands, it becomes old within a
in search of something new.
He is always in search of something new. So that instinct for stimuli, fresh stimuli, makes changes, some unpredictable changes in hairstyle, your dress, your dietary habits, your housing, everything changes because of the stimulus struggle. When there is a lot of copying, when there is a lot of conformity, people tend to come out of that conformity.
Is it that sense of fatigue that he just wants to live out of it, to come out of it?
Certainly, yes. It is that sense of fatigue, because everything reaches its critical point. When you live on a life in a dry way, in a monotonous way, then ultimately that critical limit comes when you want to overcome that critical limit and seek some new kind of stimuli, some new kind of desire to live on with a fresh mode of life. So that stimulus struggle has been the most important basic drive, because even in preservation, procreation and recognition, everything gets antiquated within a very short time.
Yes, yes.
And there is a need for change. That need for change is the basic
Professor
drive.
Ashok, we normally discuss the chronology of civilization, the history of it, that when did it begin and what is the stage that we are in at present. But civilization has another aspect to it, and that is the politics of civilization.
Definitely,
As when Napoleon invaded Egypt, he said that if we are to civilize them, we must colonize them. So the twin of civilization and colonization, both of them have gone together.
Right.
So do you think that the very concept, the very story of civilization gets tainted with that politics, that any powerful nation tries to lead the weaker one with itself?
Yes, it has been throughout the history. We have been observing, even in the present day world, in the contemporary world, we see an ugly face of this fact of civilization. But those who practice this kind of political civilization, political notion of civilization, they know what they are doing, but it is their instinct or their desire to exploit others' economic sources and natural resources, that they seek this pretext or that pretext and give the semblance of being vanquishers, victors, emancipators, all the kind of political jargon that they associate with this kind of exploitation and subordinating others. But whether it was even if we take, for instance, Helen of Troy incident, Menelaus fell in love with Helen of Troy, War of Troy. It was basically their desire to seek fresh avenues to newer countries, newer lands where they could exploit. Now even religion, race, many other things are being played at in order to subordinate others, subjugate others and exploit them. But at this juncture, I would want to differentiate between what they believe in the culture and civilization.
Yes, this
is culture and civilization are being misunderstood generally, and even in the present day world, when everything is so clear and this kind of emancipation is there, but this misunderstanding leads to political turmoils, political wars and bloodshed. For instance, there is one nation A has its own notion of culture. Culture is different from, of course, different from civilization. Culture is the superstructure.
In size, in application, or in connotations as well?
In all the three forms. It is the superstructure of the civilization. For instance, in culture, you have songs, you have your games, you have your rituals, you have your modes of worship, beliefs, cosmological point of views that every nation has borrowed from their pedigree and has been handed down over to them through their language systems. That maybe there is an element of irrationality, unreason in that, some kind of superstition may be also within that, but every nation has its own culture, every people has its own culture, and they have every right to safeguard that culture. But those who want to use this pretext of civilizing other nations generally say that this culture is inferior or that culture.
If they vanquish them, they get them civilized.
They get themselves civilized, which is in fact
quite an imperialistic notion.
Imperialistic notion, a fascistic notion.
So what makes a nation civilized? Is it power or is it progress?
It is progress, economic progress, that makes a nation civilized. But unfortunately, progress ultimately leads to power. When you exceed certain limits of progress, you become so powerful, then you have the lust to have more progress, have more economic prosperity. And
so, sir, it wasn't possible, in fact, it's not possible to sum up, to encapsulate all the history that spans centuries and millennia, millions and billions of years together in just 20-25 minutes. But then you've given a brief account of the story of civilization. We thank you very much for coming in our studio and for explaining such difficult and such intricate and complicated subject like civilization. We thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
So, civilization is all about power and hegemony that powerful nations want to enjoy and want others to follow. With these words, we take your leave. Thank you very much.